What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today we're going to talk about missing the timing. This is sometimes one of the most confusing aspects when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially for newer or more novice players, but I thought it'd be very beneficial to bring you guys this video to pretty much clarify as to what you need to look out for when it comes to missing the timing, what cards can miss timing, and basically just give you an overall guide that you can reference if you ever need to. So, before we get into it though, I just have to give a huge shout out to Alaxhav, as well as Timmy Swimmy, my newest YouTube channel members. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through a YouTube channel membership, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So before we get into the meat of the discussion, we have to clarify a few terms first so you understand what I'm talking about and we can all be on the same page. So the first few terms we need to distinguish are optional effects and mandatory effects. So an optional effect is an effect where you get to choose, or rather have the option, as to whether or not you wish to activate it. So this is usually distinguished by the words "you can," basically saying you can activate this effect or you can not activate this effect. This is something like Armageddon Night. Armageddon Night says you can send one dark monster from your deck to the graveyard, meaning you can if you want to, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. This is different from a mandatory effect, or an effect that must trigger if the conditions are met. So this is pretty much going to be devoid of the words "you can," basically saying you have to do this effect if the condition is met. Take a look at a card like BABYCERASAURUS. BABYCERASAURUS says if it's destroyed by a card effect, special summon one level 4 or lower dinosaur monster from your deck. So if it's destroyed by card effect, you have to special summon a dinosaur from your deck, unless you have no other dinosaurs left, which in that case you show your deck to your opponent, but it pretty much has to happen if the option is there for you to do so. Now we also need to distinguish a few other terms now that we understand the difference between mandatory and optional. When we're looking at the terms if and when, which are usually what the two words are that begin a lot of the effects in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is a way you can easily distinguish whether or not a card has the potential to miss timing, because it kind of breaks down into three different categories of effects. You have mandatory effects, which never miss timing no matter what, and pretty much given the option to do so, you have to activate them. You have optional effects, which do not miss timing, and then you have optional effects which do miss timing, and that's what we're going to get to. So starting off with mandatory effects. Mandatory effects, no matter what happens, will trigger. It doesn't matter if they start with if, doesn't matter if they start with when. If it's a mandatory effect, it has to activate. So that's a really easy way to know that mandatory effects cannot miss timing. That gets us to our second group, optional effects that cannot miss timing, and these usually start with the word if. Now, if with a card that has the word if in front of it, that pretty much means that whatever the precondition is for that effect to activate, say, if this card was sent to the graveyard, it doesn't matter at what point in a chain or in a certain set of actions that occurred when that monster was sent to the graveyard. If it has the word if in front of it, that means that effect is going to trigger. However, if you change that if this card is sent to the graveyard to when this card is sent to the graveyard, it makes a really big difference, because when you change if to when, it now has the potential to miss timing. When it comes to the word when, whatever the precondition is, so let's keep with the example of when this card is sent to the graveyard, you now have to have that card being sent to the graveyard be the last thing to happen in order for that when effect to trigger. Otherwise, it misses its opportunity to activate it, and even though it's an optional effect and you have the choice, you actually don't have the choice and you miss the timing in order to activate it. We're gonna get to some examples here in a little bit, but before we do, there's one other very important word you need to look out for when it comes to missing the timing, and that's the word then. So when you have a card that's basically resolving, if you see the word then, that means that the card has two effects essentially that are happening one after another. Take a look at a card like Soul Taker. Soul Taker is actually notorious when it comes to missing the timing. Soul Taker's effect reads, destroy that monster, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. So what's happening is the monster's being destroyed, then the opponent is gaining the life points. If that word then were changed to something like and, or and if you do, or also, then the conjunction really matters, and both of those effects are actually happening at the same time rather than one after another. So why does this matter? Well, let's take our example of when this card is sent to the graveyard in the form of Dupe Frog. And let's say we have Soul Taker and we use Soul Taker on Dupe Frog. Well, what's going to happen here? Well, if you use Soul Taker on Dupe Frog, Soul Taker will destroy Dupe Frog, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. So what's going to happen? Well, Dupe Frog has an effect that when it's sent to the graveyard, add one frog monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. However, because it has the word when, the last thing that has to happen in that series of actions for that effect to trigger is the Dupe Frog being sent to the graveyard. Well, was that the case? No, because Soul Taker destroyed the monster, then gave your opponent 1,000 life points. So the last thing to happen was your opponent gaining 1,000 life points, not the Dupe Frog being destroyed. So Dupe Frog will miss its timing, and your opponent won't get to search off of that Dupe Frog. So that's a very simple and basic example as to how missing the timing works, but we're going to cover some other examples as well. Let's take a look at Dupe Frog once again, since it's a really kind of, again, notorious card when it comes to missing the timing. And let's say you're going to use Dupe Frog to link summon into a monster like Miss Starboy. Will Dupe Frog miss the timing? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, it actually will, because when you link summon using Dupe Frog and say any other water monster, both the Dupe Frog and that water monster are sent to the graveyard, and Miss Starboy is summoned to the field. The last thing to happen was Miss Starboy hitting the field, not Dupe Frog getting sent to the graveyard. So again, in this instance, Dupe Frog will miss the timing, since the last thing that has to occur for the effect to trigger is Dupe Frog being sent to the graveyard. Another instance of this would be, let's say you have a Dupe Frog face up and you activate Enemy Controller. Enemy Controller has a cost that says tribute one monster you control, so we're going to go ahead and tribute off our Dupe Frog. Now, the effect is going to resolve. Let's say we take our opponent's monster, so will Dupe Frog trigger? Well, once again, it's not going to trigger, because the last thing to happen was Enemy Controller bestowing us control over our opponent's monster, not Dupe Frog being sent to the graveyard. And since a when effect, the last thing that has to happen has to be Dupe Frog being sent to the grave in order for the effect to trigger, we don't get to trigger the effect, and Dupe Frog misses the timing. We mentioned Armageddon Knight earlier, and Armageddon Knight is also a card that has a when effect. So how does a card like this miss the timing? Well, let's say you summon Goblinberg and use Goblinberg's effect to summon Armageddon Knight. Goblinberg's effect says summon one monster from your hand, then switch this card to defense position. So you're going to summon out your Armageddon Knight, Goblinberg's going to switch to defense mode, and guess what? You can't activate that Armageddon Knight, because since Armageddon Knight is a when effect, the last thing to happen wasn't Armageddon Knight being summoned, rather it was Goblinberg being switched into defense mode. So you actually cannot send a dark monster from your deck to the graveyard if it's summoned off of Goblinberg. And last but not least, I wanted to focus on forcing cards to miss timing, because a majority of these examples are basically things you're doing with your own cards. I mean, if you're using Soul Taker on an opponent's Dupe Frog, that's an example of forcing their card to miss the timing. But I want to show that it can actually be a little bit more complex than just using a card like Soul Taker. Let's say you're going up against an opponent playing Yang Zings, and they have a face-up Suwani that they just summoned into your field of 2 back row. In response to that summon, you can flip your first back row, which is Mystical Space Typhoon, and target your other face-down card. Your opponent doesn't have any other response, then you activate your second face-down card, which is Torrential Tribute. What's going to happen? Well, the chain's going to resolve backwards, Torrential Tribute's going to blow up the board and blow up the Suwani, and Mystical Space Typhoon is going to destroy Torrential Tribute. So in this instance, will Suwani get to trigger special summoning another Yang Zing monster? The answer is no, because this is a when effect, and since Suwani being sent to the graveyard was not the last thing to happen, Mystical Space Typhoon destroying Torrential was the last thing to happen, Suwani will not be able to activate its effect, so it's kind of a cool way to work around these cards that have when effects. So if you can build your chain links accordingly to be able to play around these certain types of effects, it actually can work very well in your favor. This works in a multitude of other ways as well. You could use Mystical Space Typhoon as Chainlink 1 and Raigeki Break as Chainlink 2. The same thing will occur. You can even do it if your opponent is attacking you with a Mirror Force. You could use Mystical Space Typhoon as Chainlink 1, then Mirror Force as Chainlink 2. Mirror Force destroys Suwani, MST destroys the Mirror Force, and Suwani's not going to trigger because MST destroying Mirror Force was the last thing to happen in that chain. So there's a lot of really cool tricks you can do once you understand how cards miss timing, and you can understand how to build your chain links appropriately. So wrapping up this video, the three things I want you guys to remember when it comes to missing the timing are to look for the word when, because that indicates that it's a card that can potentially miss timing. Look for the word then, because those are cards that have effects that activate one after another, not simultaneously, and are cards that can force cards to miss timing if they have a when effect, of course. And lastly, to remember the last action that happened in a chain, because that's going to make it so much easier for you guys to decipher whether or not a card can potentially miss timing. So guys, that's going to do it for the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video on missing the timing. I know it's something that can be a little bit difficult to grasp at first, but the better you understand it, it becomes second nature after no time. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support for the channel, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.